Hello, this is Truby Chiavello, publisher and editor of Primo Magazine, and I'm coming to you today. Today's date is April 30th, 2023, and it's a rainy day. It's been last few days have been rainy and overcast here in the nation's capital, kind of cold a little bit. We started this month very hot, very warm, and now we're heading to the midpoint of spring, and it's getting a little bit cooler. But it's still a nice time here in the District of Columbia. All the trees are blossoming, the flowers, the plants. They're kind of now making that transition from the bright colors that they did when they first bloomed to something more green, something more that we're going to see probably throughout the summer months. But the buzz here in the nation's capital, of course, is presidential politics. Here it is, 2023. The campaign for presidency is going to be in 2024, but it's never too early to start the way things are nowadays. And so there's a lot of activity going on there. Now, the big news is here, of course, is the big edition here. Primo is out and about. It's printed and it's mailed to everybody, and everybody's receiving it and loving it because it's such a great edition. You know who this person is here. This is Woody Woodpecker, and this is his creator, Walter Lantz. His original last name was Lanza, and he's Italian. And we feature him in this wonderful edition of Primo. It's a great edition. I loved putting it together, and I think you will too. And I'm going to have a link here where you can purchase a subscription to Primo and also a single copy. And so it's very, very nice. And so, the thing about being a publisher nowadays, a small publisher like myself, is the supply chain aspect of it. The paper and COVID-19 and everything else is still rendering its difficulties, but we're getting through it, and this is a great addition. And before I go further, if you like this video, please like it, and please subscribe. The more subscriptions we have, the more we can do. We can go beyond these kinds of presentations and also our interviews, and also include maybe short documentaries, this sort of thing that we can do, and that can be quite interesting and informative. So please subscribe to our channel. Now, presidential politics for me is always exciting because I was a political science major in undergrad. And so I've observed all the presidential elections. It's almost like, for me, it's really, people may watch sporting events on television. I like to watch politics. And, like you, probably I will pick a winner. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. But nevertheless, it's always quite fascinating. And we had President Biden on April 25th announced his reelection. Now, Donald Trump, he's going to try to win the presidency for a second time. And he announced his intentions back on November 15th, 2022. And we've had other people who've announced, Nikki Haley. The person's name is Vivek Ramaswamy. I'm not too familiar with him, but I saw a brief interview, and he's running for president. Larry Elder is running, Asa Hutchinson, and these are Republicans. And Marianne Williamson is running for the Democratic side. We're still awaiting word from Ron DeSantis. Now, he's Italian-American, and he's been a very good, effective governor of Florida. And we're going to wait to see if he announces. That should be exciting if he wants to make a run for president. But I think out of all of them, the biggest news was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. A Kennedy is going to try to make the run for the presidency. And Mr. Kennedy announced his intentions on April 19th, 2023 in Boston. And it was a long speech that he made, but a very informative speech, I thought. I thought it was a very good speech, actually. And so it's exciting to see a Kennedy making a attempt to run. Kennedys are very good at running for president. I actually studied his uncle's campaign in college, and that was interesting back then. That was in 1960, and Lyndon Baines Johnson was he was the majority leader of the Senate. He was very powerful senator from Texas, and it was just expected that he was going to inherit the White House from Dwight David Eisenhower. And he was told at the time he was a congressman at the time, Tip O'Neill. He eventually became Speaker of the House. And he was told by Tip O'Neill, this is Lyndon Baines Johnson, that you're going to lose. You're going to lose to the Kennedys. Now, because John F. Kennedy was a senator from Massachusetts, wasn't nearly as powerful or as popular as was Lyndon Baines Johnson. But nevertheless, he ran a very good campaign. The Kennedys have a lot of money. They have a lot of connections, but they also have a lot of good insights. They come up with really good ideas and good campaign slogans. And they make good speeches. And this is very effective. So sure enough, John F. Kennedy won the primaries, and he went on to win the presidency. And then Robert F. Kennedy, in 1968, he announced his intentions to run, and everybody thought he was going to lose. But he started winning some big primaries. And then, unfortunately, after he won the California primary, he was assassinated. This happened on June 5th, 1968, at the Ambassador Hotel. And it still remains a great tragedy, just as his brother, President Kennedy, was killed in November of 1963 in Dallas. Now, Senator Edward Kennedy, he ran against Jimmy Carter in 1980, and he too was considered someone who wasn't going to do well because of some scandals in his background. And at the beginning, I think it was tough for him, but as I recall back then, he started winning some serious primaries. He won New York, for instance, and went on to win some others. And people said if this continued, he just ran out of time, really, because Carter had more delegates, and Jimmy Carter was the eventual nominee. He lost, though, to Reagan. But at the time, people said if this continued, the primary season was able to continue, that Kennedy had the momentum, he could have won it. So, don't count out the Kennedys. They're very effective. And what I like about Robert F. Kennedy's announcement campaign is I've tried to, for preparation for this episode, I listened to some of his podcasts that he had on Apple. And I was impressed with how intellectual he is. I think he's going to be the first presidential candidate we've had that's intellectual, that likes to talk about history, culture, geography, science, that's interested in these sorts of things. And I think he's the first real intellectual president we've had, you could argue, since Nixon, or really since his father, Robert F. Kennedy. So this is interesting. Now, why it's important to Italian Americans, why the purpose of this episode? Well, Kennedy is running against deep state. That's what he says. That's what's pushed him forward to make an announcement and to run for the presidency. And he's critical of the deep state apparatus, as is Donald Trump. And what is deep state? Well, in a nutshell, deep state is when you have powerful federal agencies that ally themselves with the industries that they're supposed to regulate, to put forward laws and mandates to force us to buy certain products and services that we might not otherwise buy because of the other choices we have are regulated out of service or regulated out of the marketplace. You can call it corporate cronyism or whatever it is you want to, but the deep state apparatus is also connected to more so than ever before to the media. I mean, if you look back at our history, yeah, we've always had some sort of government agency aligned with an industry, this sort of thing. You can call it corruption or extortion, whatever it is. But sometimes it's just that the two ends meet together, and this is what's best for the country. We've had this. And we've had the media censoring objections to it. But today it's more apparent, it's more front, and it's exposed more often. So we see deep state working with the press, the media, to outright censor and outright ban people from speaking out that may criticize some of the policies and efforts where the federal agencies come together with industry. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was censored. He was banned from expressing himself on a host of media outlets. Facebook had taken out his page. Instagram did the same thing. He wasn't allowed to speak up against the COVID-19 vaccine and policies on Twitter and Google. And so this has propelled him forward to run this candidacy. He is critical, Bobby Kennedy is critical of the COVID-19 and the coronavirus protocols and the vaccine that was put in place. He's termed an anti-vaxxer because people see this akin to someone who's very religious, for instance, who may not want his kid vaccinated because it goes against the will of God. That's not really the case with Kennedy. Kennedy does have his got a number of kids. They've all been vaccinated. He's just critical of the ingredients involved and the after effects. And as he sees it, the poster boy, the central figure of deep state that he has had most antagonism with is Dr. Anthony Fauci. So he sees Dr. Anthony Fauci as most representative of the deep state apparatus. And Bobby Kennedy now has a class action lawsuit against the White House because claiming that he was censored as other people were. And he sees Anthony Fauci as the figure, as the person behind the scenes who was pushing this effort of censorship. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But this is what he makes the case for. And he wrote a book called The Real Anthony Fauci, which is really a condemnation of Dr. Fauci. And then he followed it with a documentary that I had a tough time seeing in preparation for this video. I was able to see it on Rumble, and it had the subtitles of it. It looked like it was in the Portuguese language or something. So it's been one of those things where this is another consistent example of the censorship or his challenge of getting his word out. He makes the case that the book, he wanted to place an ad in the New York Times, and they forbid him from doing it. He was going to pay $18,000 to advertise his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, and the New York Times wouldn't let him do it. They didn't accept the advertisement. So this is just one example that he has. And, in viewing the documentary and seeing how Kennedy's going to run against Fauci, I think this is representative of our situation, and maybe we could talk about it in a little more detail as to what they're doing, and maybe try to set the record straight about some of these things, some of these accusations and allegations that they've made against Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci is someone who is really praised and acclaimed by many in the Italian American community. Anytime there was a gala or some sort of event at the Order Sons of Italy of America or with the National Italian American Foundation, other Italian American groups, it was always present. When I first started, for instance, I was receiving photographs from the from either organization, the National Italian American Foundation or the Sons of Italy, of the guests they had and the awards that they were given and the sponsorship of awards. Quite often, Dr. Fauci was in half the photographs. He was that prevalent of a figure. And there's a good reason for it. He represents science. He's a man of science, an acclaimed physician, immunologist. But he came from Brooklyn, New York. He was born in 1940, Christmas Eve. His both sets of grandparents came from Italy. They were Italian immigrants. On his father's side was Sciacca and Sicily is where they came from. And his mother's family, maternal name was Abbas, came from Naples. And his father was a pharmacist. He got his pharmacology degree at Columbia, and they had the pharmacy there in Dyker Heights, and they lived above the store. And so here was a young man, one of two kids that they had, who was surrounded by medicine, surrounded by medications, therapies, bright, intelligent young boy, I should say. And he went on to get his high school degree in Manhattan from the Jesuit high school there. And then he went on to Holy Cross College in Massachusetts, which was also run by the Jesuits. And he went on to get his medical degree at Cornell, Anthony Fauci, and he graduated number one in his class. That's very significant. And so the reason why they like someone like Dr. Anthony Fauci, these are the Italian American organizations, is because whenever the media looks at Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, whatever, the Italian American community there, it's always organized crime. It's always the mafia. And yet there's hundreds of thousands of people live in these areas. And they don't talk about the people who went on to become accountants, lawyers, doctors, professors. Many people have gone on to achieve honorable professions and degrees, and they were overlooked for the small minority of mobsters and gangsters from this area. Now, I'm not against mafia films and mafia depictions. I will say this, though, there's too many of them, and they dominate these areas of the country. We don't get to see the good, law-abiding Italian Americans who went on to achieve great things. We see that, however, in Dr. Anthony Fauci. In fact, when he speaks, when he spoke for the White House and what have you, you could always hear a little bit of his Brooklyn accent there. Well, Dr. Anthony Fauci graduated from Cornell, number one of his class, and after his residency, he went straight to the public sector, and he worked for a laboratory division of physiology for the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And this is under the National Institute of Health, which is under the Department of Health and Human Services. And so this, I think, is in the early 70s. He's there in this position. He ended up managing or being the director of this section of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He went up the ranks. In 1984, he was named the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He stayed in that position until 2023, New Year's Eve, when he finally resigned, I think at the age of 82. He's lived here in the Washington, D.C. area. I believe he lives in the Wesley Heights neighborhood. When my second born, Rami, was a baby, he used to wake up very early, and I would take care of him in the morning along with his mother. And it was couldn't go back to sleep, so I would go to the Starbucks on New Mexico Avenue here in Washington, D.C., bright and early, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I would see Dr. Anthony Fauci. He was jogging, and he would stop to get a cup of coffee to start his day. So this was somebody who was devoted to his service, to his public service. For the most part, he's achieved a lot. Now, as Bobby Kennedy Jr. sees it, someone like Dr. Anthony Fauci has been involved so long in his position that he becomes very powerful. And so therefore you can't really, it's tough to criticize somebody like that, particularly when he has so many connections throughout government. And, Bobby Kennedy was also at one point in time taught from the Jesuits here at Georgetown Preparatory College. He, though, however, went on to graduate from Harvard, get a law degree from the University of Virginia. He got a master's. He got a master's also of law, I think, for Pace University, if I'm not mistaken. He's about 14 years younger than Dr. Anthony Fauci. But the two people cross paths, the two people have crossed paths over the years. But Kennedy was instrumental in environmental law. And because he pursued environmental law, he really was a pioneer of it. I remember my time in law school, they had people said, there was no future in environmental law. It was just pretty much a dispute of property or something of that effect. He took it one step further. He really initiated these big class action lawsuits. Also, these lawsuits that he would represent fisheries against chemical companies, particularly in the area of the Hudson River and Long Island. And he established cleanup entities, legal groups that would oversee the cleanup of these areas based upon these lawsuits. And he was quite the pioneer of this. But he began to realize how mercury was infecting the water and affecting the fish, and that would lead to birth defects for some people, with children especially. And when he was making a speech about this one day, he was confronted by a group of parents who said that their kids had been adversely affected from mercury poisoning, and their children were suffering from autism or suffering from some sort of health defect. And he thought it was from the water. And they said, no, it was from vaccines. And apparently, mercury was an ingredient in vaccines. And then he began to do some more research about that. And then he had some serious questions about the efficacy and safety of vaccines. And at that point in time, he called the CDC and the National Institute of Health, some of the contacts he had there. And what they told him was, um, go talk to somebody from Pfizer or some other pharmaceutical company. And that was a shock to him because we're supposed to regulate these companies, and yet they're the ones that have established that know more about the policy and laws of the regulatory body. And as he kept delving into this issue, as according to the book that he's written, The Real Anthony Fauci, and the documentary, it was Anthony Fauci who was always at the center of it all. And he begins his critique in his documentary, at least, about AIDS and how AIDS and how Dr. Fauci is of his focus on fear. The idea at the time, this was a disease that affected gays and mostly gay men, and then intravenous drug users. And then there was some in the heterosexual community that was affected. But this is what they drove the point, that physical intimacy, closeness of people would get you the disease of AIDS and could kill you. And they showed, they showed a commercial where it was the Grim Reaper was in the background. And you have a young couple, 16, 17 years old on the couch, holding each other and that sort of thing. And basically the message is, if this kind of close contact is going to end up getting you AIDS and killing you. And so this was kind of the message that was put forward, the idea, the fear, using fear to put pressure on the government and on industry to finally get some sort of vaccine, some sort of useful antidote. And this is the criticism that they have of Dr. Fauci. Now, Dr. Fauci did an awful lot of good for the AIDS crisis. He stayed with it for many years. His team and at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases came up with a number of ways to treat the AIDS virus. But again, the criticism of him is that he didn't embrace alternative methods, alternative means of trying to treat people. There was a lot of misinformation. At one point in time, he and some others stated that he only had about 3 months to live if he had received AIDS. And then that was changed 3 years, 10 years. And now some people who have the AIDS virus are still able to live productive lives. Now, in defense of Dr. Fauci, in that respect, I think that he probably didn't know enough at that time. Not of his own ignorance, it's just that not enough information is coming to him yet as they're trying to figure out this disease. Now, he's gone on to some criticism about him is that he's made a lot of money or a lot of patents, this sort of thing. I think there's only about 11 patents that he has, and I don't think that's too unreasonable considering he's been the director of this important agency that we have within the National Institute of Health. But he shares those patents with other people. So there's other people that he's working with that he shares some of these patents for. And he's done a lot for rheumatology, cancer treatments in some cases. So he's done a lot of good. Now, where the criticism comes down to in the documentary is, COVID-19, coronavirus, a terrible nightmare that we all had to live through. I had problems with it. I thought that it was a serious rush in the fear of the pandemic. That's what really what generated this. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He has an organization called the Children's Health Defense. Was critical of the protocols of coronavirus, the masks, the lockdown, and he began to become silenced. They began to silence him and silence others. And this is a serious problem because, we should question our leaders. I came across an interesting quote from a book we're currently selling, by the way, called Christ Stopped at Eboli. I think you can see it there. Carlo Levi was a physician who was sent into exile because of his opposition to Mussolini. And he was sentenced to a village, very remote, Gagliano in the Basilicata region. And here's a community that's in need of a doctor. And the only person that can really treat them, they have two doctors already there. One is both are ornery and they're not really good at treating the citizens there. So where they go to is the barber. They have to go to the barber to get proper medical treatment. And Dr. Levy is there, and he says he writes the following, which I think is instructive about how we look at people who have degrees, PhDs or medical degrees or whatever, and how we're not expected to challenge them. And this is what he writes, Dr. Levy. He says about the barber, little did it matter that he had no license. He did a good job, but he had to work undercover because Italy is a land of degrees and diplomas. Again, Italy is a land of degrees and diplomas, where so-called culture is often reduced to the chase after a profitable position and spasmodic, feeble efforts to hold on to it. Many a peasant of Gagliano, who might have limped all his life long if the official practitioners had handled him, is walking today thanks to this barber, smuggler and jack of all trades, this quick-witted and swift-footed witch doctor at odds with the forces of the law. And I think it's very instructive. You know, just because somebody has a degree, a medical degree, or a PhD, or a master's, whatever, doesn't mean what they're telling you is going to be right. You can question them, and if their ideas go against common sense, sound absurd, then you can dismiss them in this instance and go on to someone else. Not everybody's going to be correct. Not everybody's a prophet from God with the exact right words and the exact right diagnosis and prognosis. So when Dr. Anthony Fauci and others are promoting the idea of lockdown, where we're not going to let you leave your home, we should question that and question the sanity and logic of it all. When I first heard of this, I said to myself, gee whiz, if you're living in an apartment building and you're not allowed to leave, then you're kind of a sitting duck for the disease because somebody down the hallway might have contracted coronavirus. Since you can't leave, I think it's a matter of time until the virus reaches you as this person walks around the hallways and what have you. You should be allowed to leave your residence and go to someplace else where it's safe. Or you should be able to leave during the daytime, different hours, just to get away from the flow of air within your confines to move around. And there was, I think what Bobby Kennedy says, I think is very interesting about the founding fathers was, they did live under a time of pandemics, of diseases, of plagues. And they fully knew that when they put together our rights, the right to mobility, that was that purpose, was to leave if your community or your town or your village became infected with some sort of disease. And what we saw with the lockdown, with the mask mandates, which they bring up how often Dr. Fauci changed his mind about them. At first, it did no good to wear a mask. Then you had to wear a mask. Then you had to wear 2 masks. And we closed down businesses, a number of other things. How that took away our rights. You no longer had the right to leave your home, so the right to mobility was undone. The freedom of religion. You couldn't go to church. You couldn't go to mass. The few times that we did have mass during the height of the pandemic, there was no water in the baptismal font. You couldn't take Eucharist. You couldn't then freedom of assembly, getting together with folks. And then it went on beyond that, where we started to criticize, question these fast protocols were put in place very quickly without much deliberation, you were censored. So your freedom of expression, your freedom of press was denied. And the sad part about it was a lot of people didn't come on board, didn't support the idea of preserving our rights and our freedoms, even during a time of pandemic. So Bobby Kennedy Jr. brings this up, and that's the criticism that he puts into place with regards to Dr. Fauci and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And the protocols are put in place very fast, very abrupt by so many people in government, by the federal government, but also by the state and municipal agencies. And this is something that still raises serious concerns. The fact that the big tech media would censor people and not allow them to provide alternatives to this situation. Now that we're looking back on it, we're raising questions that we should have raised back then. So this, I think, is something to be concerned about. Dr. Fauci, no matter how it was, I still believe he was a noble man and a good man. But I think the big problem that he ran into, and others, is that at the end of the day, he was there in position of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases for so long. Once you're there in the bureaucracy for that long, you retain tremendous power and autonomy, and you become set in your ways. So he was there for almost 40 years. And, presidents came and went. Senators came and went. A lot of Congress people came and went. But they are elected. And here was somebody who was unelected. And so he began to attain more influence, more power than other people. When this crisis occurred, and you had President Trump, who was typical New York, typical brash, versus another New Yorker, but more quizzical, more thoughtful, more in control. People looked to him, and he was the main advisor to the president. So there was rumors that President Trump wanted to fire Fauci. I don't think he could have. I really don't think he could have done it, because he would have been attacked all over the place. And so this is someone who has a lot of power, prestige, and influence to put in place something as drastic as possible. There's another quote here from this book that I want to share with you about that. What's the whole essence of it all. And it's just the power of the state. It's just the power of what we have to consider. And this is what he says. He's going to Dr. Levy, Christoph Ebele. He's going to Matera. He's finally given permission to go there to paint. He's not only is he a physician, but he's also a painter. And the people who are there, the officials, they don't really care. Come along, you can do it. It's the other officials from other parts of Italy that are giving him a hard time. And this is what he said. He said, "I never knew the officials at Matera who had charge of political prisoners, but they were apparently not a bad lot. Because the post was so undesirable, it must have been filled by old war horses, heirs to Bourbon skepticism and hidebound by paperwork and routine. Into these bureaucratic old heads, there had not yet, thank God, penetrated the new schoolmaster's culture. The idealism of the night schools, which animated the hysterical zeal of the young and led them to imagine that the state had an ethical quality, that it was a person like themselves with a similar personal morality, and that it should impinge upon the individual as an extension of his own petty ambitions and paltry sadism and exhibitionism, while at the same time it should appear to the profane as inscrutable, sacred, and enormous." So this is what he's writing here about and I think that sums up the state, the power of the state. When you have people there in the bureaucracy, and they've been there for longer than 2 decades, they become seriously set in their ways. And that, I think, was the danger of the coronavirus pandemic and what was done about it. It's interesting in the documentary, The Real Anthony Fauci, it begins with a simulation. This was done back in 2019, before the virus broke out, before the pandemic occurred. And it was a simulation sponsored by, I think, by the CDC. And there on this, in this long table, are these people talking and have a video presentation. Gee, what will it be like if a pandemic breaks out? And this is some months before coronavirus. And sure enough, it comes from China and it breaks out, and people are scared and worried. And we need to lock down people. We need to close businesses. We need to stop the spread of these diseases. And what's pointed out, however, is it's not so much physicians who are there, but it's people within the CIA are there to control the information, members of the military to control the people. It's very harrowing. The idea that this happened prior to the outbreak of COVID-19 is very disturbing. And so, we have here, Bobby Kennedy Jr. running for president, and he's really running against Anthony Fauci, who he sees as representative of deep state. And so this is what we see happening. We see the outsider versus the insider, and how power can corrupt, how power can lead us to do things we normally wouldn't do. And to really analyze this and to delve forward I think, is a very good thing. I think in the future, what we can do is probably put in place a limit, we call term limits. Everybody's shouting about term limits in Congress. Well, why not have a term limit in bureaucracy? Problem is that they're unelected, so there's no check on them if they come up with ideas or try to pursue goals that can affect us all. And so this is something to consider. The Bobby Kennedy is pursuing his presidency ambitions, but also pursuing a class action lawsuit where he names Dr. Fauci and others involved. So we'll see how that turns out. But it's something to look into, and I welcome your comments. To look back at those years, 2020 really was a very difficult time for a lot of people, and it was difficult for Italian Americans. A lot of Italian Americans, small business owners, lost their establishments, lost their businesses because of coronavirus, because they couldn't get customers anymore. And that, I think, was very sad. And then when you added to that these terrible riots that occurred in the summer of 2020, which destroyed some of their properties and other things, it was a very, very sad time. And so as Primo, we came out to defend the small business owner. We came out to defend the mom and pop shop. No control over this situation. This thing was pushed upon them, thrusted upon them. We came out to defend the churches and other small institutions that we live for that found themselves pushed out of service because of this fear of pandemic and the power of the state, the power of the government to control their lives. And I think it was a very sad time. So I'm hopeful that the Kennedy campaign at least will bring greater awareness of this, and perhaps we can change some of the things we do in the future when another pandemic occurs, God forbid. But anyway, this is April 30th. Please like this video, please subscribe, and I hope you found this video presentation informative. And I look forward to speaking with you again very soon. Until then, we have a new edition out. Please pick it up, and hope to talk to you again very, very soon. Until then, God bless. Thanks.